Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This week, Westworld Episode 1 premiered, and oh my god, was it good. Let's get started. So let's talk about that opening, all right? So you have, the piano made of white bone goo or whatever playing along here while they show all of these assembly features that are going on with all of the hosts that they're putting together. I think it's a great intro. I think HBO has learned from Game of Thrones that if you want to have a successful show, gripping people right from that opening hook is super important. After the opening, the monologue starts between Jeffrey Wright, or Bernard in the show, and Dolores, or Evan Rachel Wood. Jeffrey starts talking about, have you ever questioned your reality? Have you ever, thought that something's strange, something's off? And Dolores is pretty much, going along saying she sees the beauty in the world that she's in. She sees the beauty in all the things around her. While some people choose to see the negatives, she chooses to see the positive. I like how Bernard is like, telling Dolores, there's nothing to be afraid of as long as you answer my questions correctly. So there is something to be afraid of then. Then moving along, we continue with Dolores' day. She basically goes into town to get a few things. Basically, Teddy, or James Marsden, comes off the train as the gallant newcomer. And was anyone else with me that I thought that maybe he was real at first? I thought that maybe he was a guest to the park just by the way that he was acting in those first few scenes. But anyway, you get some cute dialogue between Teddy and Dolores. Then they go off gallivanting around Westworld. I do have to say the scenery shots for this show so far, beautiful. So Dolores and Teddy decide to head home. I don't know if Teddy's was supposed to meet Dolores' dad or not, but I thought that would have been really funny. So basically, they arrive at the house. They hear gunshots up at the house. Teddy rides in, super White Knight style, guns a-blazing. Kills the two intruders, but not after they've already killed Dolores' mother and father. Obviously, then Dolores comes up to, make sure Teddy's okay. And then steps in the Black Rider. So basically, Teddy tries to take on the Man in Black. He's not succeeding. Ed Harris is apparently overpowered because he's a guest. And you hear Jeffrey Wright's voice in the background. Are you angry at the newcomers because they can't be killed? And Dolores, replies with, well, everyone's just looking for something and they're just trying to enjoy themselves. Then after that really last scene transitions, we start into basically the day starting over again. We come upon Jeffrey Wright, or Bernard, the lead programmer, and one of his assistants, and they're basically working on this hooker bot from the hosts, and basically he's going over the new upgrade that he just implanted, and he starts talking about reveries, which is basically a small piece of code implanted into the upgrade process this time that allows the host to access specific memories and tie them to emotions, making them seem all the more realistic. So Bernard heads to lead for pretty much the head ops manager. Her name is Teresa. She basically is the end wall between the software engineers and then the creative people, the writers, directors, that kind of thing going on at Westworld. So pretty much she has to deal with the human versus host interactions. So she gets to kind of make those calls. So anyways, Bernard comes in, starts talking, and then Teresa's like, hey, there's movement down in cold storage. Somebody should go check it out. So she sends basically her security lead, and then Bernard says, hey, I'll tag along. We go down to cold storage. There's tons of water pouring in. I guess there's some sort of leak, and they turn that off. I'm obviously like super creeped out because it's super dark, and they're just walking past all of these turned off or retired hosts, and basically they see the boss in this little room talking to Bill, or the second oldest robot at Westworld. Dolores sees her dad, Papa, sitting on the front porch staring at something. So she walks up, and he has this like super emotionally concerned face looking down at this photograph that he found, and it basically has one of the visitors to the park, basically one of their kids has a big city in the background of this picture, and the dad does not know what to make of this. And, he keeps asking Dolores, do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? And she says, no, don't worry. She just like brushes it to the side. She's like, no, don't care. And basically, she walks inside and just leaves him there. One of my favorite scenes in Westworld takes place. Basically, Teresa is up on the roof of the headquarters of Westworld. She's up there, smoking, gathering her thoughts about how weird it is with the sheriff. And she seems a little bit spooked for sure, at first anyway. And so Lee thinks he can kind of use this to his advantage. He walks up and, he's like apologizing and trying to compliment Teresa. So then I love Teresa's response to him. Basically, she goes on and she gives this great speech about how, oh, you have the vision to see that there is something bigger, but not enough to see what the actual big picture is. And she says, what is your worth to me if you can't even tell me what the big picture of Westworld is? She basically says, it's one of my favorite lines, she says, yeah, Westworld is one thing to the guests, one thing to the shareholders, and one thing to management. We come on to the scene where Walter has just basically massacred everyone inside the saloon. He's walking slowly, drinking his milk as it pours out of him, and I'm like, dear Lord, this is, getting ridiculous. And he goes outside and he starts drowning his mutton chop buddy basically in milk, and eventually they stop the scene. So Teresa gives the green light to Lee to do a massacre of the entire town, and she does this because it helps them knock out the hosts that are infected, and then they'll be able to pull them out of the Westworld. So Dolores wakes up the next day, goes outside just like what you think is going to be a normal day routine in Westworld, and then she looks and she sees her father, whom she left sitting there last night, still staring at that picture. So basically Dolores decides to go into town, get a doctor, because she's super worried about her dad. She thinks it's something medically wrong with him, and she's still under the impression that her world is real. So basically she goes into town, and you guys probably were guessing like, okay, this is where shit hits the fan. And you were right. So basically she's in town, she tries to reach the doctor and can't. And then Teddy, of course, wanders over and is like, hey, and then they have their little reunion thing. And they basically talk for a little bit. And then he notices, all these, hooded figures riding into town. And he's like, probably not the best time. We should probably get into cover here. And so then the bloodbath starts. So the hooded figures end up being the bandits, Hector and his gang. Basically, they're the ones that are at the beginning of the story where the sheriff's like, hey, do we want to go hunt them down? And so basically, Hector is walking into town, zero shits given, and you can tell that people are starting to freak out. He kills one guy because he wants to take the sheriff's horse, and basically his girlfriend, the blonde chick, Annie Oakley, I don't know what you want to call her, I don't remember her name currently, and she basically hops off her horse, and this is where shit really starts to get down, okay? So Hector walks into the bar, him and Pennyfeather immediately like glance at each other, and you can tell that like there's definitely like this flirtatious vibe between them. You hear Paint It Black by the Stones kick on the piano in this like old western, and it's super slow when it starts. Dun, 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 dun. So Lee is basically standing above the hologram, getting off to his own story, kind of like playing out in front of him. It's a little creepy in my mind. I think he's a little too into it. But obviously he's standing there, he's watching it all take place. People are dropping like flies. Hector's girlfriend is just like headshotting pretty much everyone that's ever hoped to leave that town. He's going to give this big speech that Lee had been talking up to Teresa, saying, oh, it's going to be a great speech, it's going to be fantastic. And literally not even one word into the speech, he gets shot in the neck by one of the guests, and you can see the disappointment on Lee's face. That was beautiful. Because then after pulling all of the infected hosts, basically they bring the security lead in. He starts questioning Dolores, and I love the way that they basically start off the monologue speech that Jeffrey or Bernard was doing at the beginning, where he's talking about, do you question your reality? I just need you to answer my questions. Don't be afraid. Dolores' father, Papa, he's one of the ones that's pulled, and so he's not having a great time. They say he's way more off than the sheriff was or any of the other affected by the upgrade in the reveries, and so Ford finds this very interesting. Papa says his itinerary is to meet his maker, and so Ford kind of congratulates him and says, you're in luck. And so Papa kind of freaks out and, grabs Ford, and he's like, you're living in a prison of your own sins and you're never going to escape. Ford then talks about how that Papa could access the Shakespeare when he had him, roll back to the previous version. He started talking about Shakespeare and stuff. And basically Ford kind of says, he played a professor at a dinner party that we used to have. We've had this host for a really long time, and one of his previous roles in that world was to be a professor. So he knew Shakespeare and could quote those sort of things. And I cut back to the scene, and he says, what did he say to you? And Dolores repeats part of it and says, violent delights have violent ends. And I definitely think that's very interesting. But if you notice, he also says something else into her ear that she does not repeat. And the security guard then says, have you ever lied to us? And Dolores says, no. Security lead then like questions her again and says, you know, like, would you ever hurt a living being? And she says no. And the security lead says, you know, she's actually the oldest host in Westworld. She is the original host. She's been serviced so many times, wiped so many times, that there's absolutely no way she remembers any of those things from her previous upgrades. And I think that this is definitely very important. Okay, Dolores is clearly, you know, the main protagonist, I guess we can consider at this point, of basically, you know, the show, is that, you know, her figuring out where she belongs and what she wants to do. That's kind of like the whole point of the show. So I think it's really important that she's the oldest host, because, as something that Ford said earlier in the series, he goes, you know, they're able to access, with the reveries, they're able to access previous personalities. So if she is the oldest host, she clearly has the most personalities to access. And that means that she could basically pull way more data in than any other host thus far, because she's been around for so long. So basically, I'm really excited to see where this storyline goes. The plot so far definitely has me pretty hooked, which HBO is really well known for. And the soundtrack is, oh my gosh, just once again, two thumbs straight up, like absolutely nailing it. And I'm really excited to see where this series go. So thank you guys for joining us so far in our first review video, Ouroboros Bros. My name is RJ. So if you like this video and you guys want to subscribe to see more Westworld content, we're going to have a lot more content coming out soon too, with Gotham and DC and Marvel and Stranger Things and a whole bunch of other shows that we're going to be reviewing. Please like, comment, and subscribe below, and we'll see you again next time. Bye guys.